garage. In this video, I'm going to be assembling the Team Associated B6.3 Bag 1 and Bag 2. So let's get started. When I like to start building, what I like to do is open up the bag that I'm going to be working with and put it in a paper plate. That way, none of your parts and things like that will roll off the table, and hopefully they'll stay, where they need to be. So that was bag 1. I just opened up. You can kind of see the parts. Let's open up the small bag with the ball screws, bearings, almost lost this washer. All right, so the first thing that I did was actually read through the steps. So I'm kind of familiar with what I got to do. And that way, I recommend that you guys do that too. So that way you know all the little notes and warnings and things like that they put in the instructions, so you don't miss a thing. All right, so gotta take this piece, it's called the steering rack, off the parts tree. Go ahead and take off the flashing and the tabs. Just take a hobby knife and just kind of trim off any excess. Right. It gives you, in the instructions, it tells you what's the top. So I'm hoping that comes out on the video. Well, it's gonna be hard to see that on the video, but it basically has top written on the piece, and this is the front of the piece here. So far, pretty happy with the quality of plastics. Feels good in the hand. Okay. Now we need to install the ball bearings. There's 3 by 7 by 3. So I think it's going to be these small ones. And if you look in your manual, if you open up the first page, on page 3, it shows all the screw lengths, and it also gives you the bearing sizes, and you can use that to line up to figure out which bearing's which. So that's the 3 by 7 by 3 that we need. So don't forget to reference that if you ever have any questions about what to install where. And I like to put the rubber seal facing outward, like so. So the blue rubber seal, you want to face that outward. And then on the bottom, it says to put the aluminum washers. And then install the bearing. Okay. And then we'll install the 8mm heavy duty ball stud. I'm going to reference that first page, or page 3 I mean. And there's the 8mm ball stud. And we'll start by screwing that in. I'm just going to start it and come back with my Allen to screw that all the way in. That was a 2mm Allen. And to make things quicker, I'm going to use an electric screwdriver. Don't tighten it down all the way because you might hurt the plastic or strip it out. So tighten it most of the way down with the electric screwdriver, and then come back and tighten it completely by hand. And all you gotta do is snug it up, just shoulder out. The ball stud onto the plastic, and that's it. All right, the next pieces are the bell cranks, left and right, and it looks like they're on this part tree. And just break that off. And then trim any excess. Take care when doing this because you don't want to cut yourself or cut off too much material. Additionally, you could use a file to file it down or use some sandpaper. I've got that on hand if I need it, but seems like just taking a hobby knife, it comes right off. You have your left and right bell crank. What you'll notice, the left bell crank looks different. It actually has an extra hole in it. And that's probably where the ball stud is gonna go for your steering. So let's get that on. Again, we're gonna use the same 3x7x3 bearings. And again, make sure that the rubber seal or the blue part is facing out. Okay, there's that one. Okay, and now we can assemble. Yeah, it looks like we can start assembling this onto the front ball stud mount. I'm gonna take that piece off and this piece off. It actually says that there's 2 steering bell crank braces in the kit, but this is the one that they're showing pictured, so I'm gonna go with that. It actually looks like it's gonna be a little stronger than the other one, so we're gonna use that. Okay, let's take off the flashing here. We need the 3 and 3x12 millimeters, which I believe are these. Looks like they will come through here. And out like that. So there you can kind of see the orientation. And then you don't want to tighten it too much because you want the steering to be nice and loose and free. So you don't want any binding. That's pretty free. You want it to be able to move around without forcing it. Just like that. Okay. So now we've got the M3 by 20 millimeter screws are going to go in from the top through this brace first, and then through the bell cranks, and then into the ball stud mount, into the back 2 holes. So there, I actually tightened it too tight. You can see it's not moving freely. So again, don't want to tighten it too much. You want it to be able to move under its own weight, just like that, so nice and smooth. The steps say to install the ball stud, the heavy duty ball stud, the 10 millimeters later when you do bag 2 step 9. Otherwise it makes the front tower more difficult to install, so remember that. We're going to hold on to that. The last piece is this shorter ball stud onto the bell crank. And that's it for bag 1. Let's move on to bag 2. Looks like we've got quite a few parts left over from bag 1. Got some ball studs, some washers, and looks like the rest of the bearings. But for the most part, use all the plastics. You just have this one bell crank brace, which I'm actually going to take off the parts tree and throw the rest of the plastics away, and I'll put this in my spare parts box. All right, so on to bag 2. Let's open that up. And this is, in this bag, there's a part that I'm actually not going to use because I have an upgrade part that everyone local basically says and swears by, hey, this is a must-have upgrade. So I'll show you guys that. It's basically it's a J Concepts bulkhead. It's made out of steel. Apparently these are cracking when you hit something hard. So this is a good upgrade to have. And it also adds a little bit of weight up front on the car, which will help with traction and also keep the front end down when you are in the air. All right, so let's get started in bag 2. Oh man, these parts are really nice. Excited about this carbon fiber front shock tower. All right, so looks like we need this bag to start with. There's a lot of small parts in here, so be careful. All right, so we've got the anti-roll bar. We need to put this collar on. Let me find the set screw. It's an M3 by 2.5 millimeter set screw. So what I'm going to do is add a dab of Loctite on here. And then don't need too much, so I'm going to take some of the excess off with a piece of paper towel. you don't want to over tighten the screw because you can easily bend the sway bar. So basically, as soon as you touch it, I'm not using any type of leverage. I'm just kind of twisting my fingers. So as soon as you touch it, I say that's pretty good. And with the Loctite, it should stay in place. So there we go. Then again, if there's any excess Loctite that came out, just wipe that down with paper towel. Now we're going to install it in here. You're supposed to install it with 2 M2.5 by 6mm screws. So again, I'm going to check this with the first page. This is a section that someone had mentioned locally that this might not be the best fit possible for these screws. So we're going to take a look to see how well that screw actually holds the sway bar. They're saying that there wasn't a lot of overlap. I mean, there's not much holding that screw or holding the sway bar in. Let's see if you can see that in the video. I mean, there's barely any screw head actually overlapping that sway bar. I think it'll be okay. But I mean, something that we could easily do is add a washer. I'm gonna actually try to tighten it down a little bit more and see how it fits. But if not, I've got some washers in my RC spares bag. You don't want to tighten it too much because you want the I mean, I don't think it'll pop out. I mean, that's a decision for y'all to make, but you could probably put a small washer in there to prevent it. But I mean, there's barely anything. See if you can see it. You can see it's like barely anything touching that sway bar. I'm gonna see if I do have a washer that we can put in there. All right, so I looked at my bag. I couldn't find any screw that would, or any washer that would work. So I'm just gonna keep moving forward and hope that that bar doesn't pop out. I don't think it will. I shouldn't see that much load. I mean, the only time that might come out is if it saw a huge impact. So, but hopefully that won't happen. Okay. Moves nice and freely. I'll just back off just a tad. Yeah, that moves nice and freely. So step 1 is done. Let's move on to step 2. So step 2 is where we're going to install this J-Concepts front bulkhead. And there's actually 2 ways to set this up. You have a 25 degrees and a 30 degrees setting that goes on to the chassis. And it says that on the stock piece, as you can see here, you got 30 and 25. And on this upgraded piece, you have the same thing. You have 30 and 25, and 25 degrees is the stock setting. I'm gonna go with the 25 degrees and see how the setup handles out of the box before I start tuning. And look at this chassis. That's how beautiful that is. So the bulkhead insulation, the bulkhead goes on the bottom, and then this will go on just like that. And you can see that this upraise feature will actually go into the larger holes in the chassis. And let's see. Let's open up this bag. Okay, and these are the screws I need. So it looks like we're gonna need the M3 by 16 millimeter flathead screws. Make sure you've got the 25 degrees facing forward. Remember, you're screwing into plastic, so you don't want to strip it out. So just go slowly back and forth until you reduce the gap in between the chassis and the bulkhead. And you'll feel when everything bottoms out, so just leave it like that. All right, so that was step 2. We can move on to step 3, which is installing the chassis weights, battery foams, and side rails. Okay, and those use an M2 by 3 millimeter flathead screw. Those are going to be really tiny. See if you can see that. How small they are. So since they're going into metal, you want to add a dab of Loctite, and this time what I'm going to do is actually put some Loctite in this tray. That way I can like dip. Make sure you can see that, yeah. That way you can just like dip the Loctite on there and you don't get too much excess. Such as a small screw, you don't want to try to put too much torque into it because you're going to strip out the head. And the Loctite should be more than enough to kind of hold it into place. Nice and flush. Got a little bit of excess on there. I'm just going to wipe off. Now I got this one to do. On this one, I'm just going to start the threads on each one and then go back and tighten in a crisscross pattern. Now I'm going to tighten up this one. say that one. Okay. Now we can install the side rails and the battery foams. So it looks like we've got battery foams that install into these channels here. Okay. We've got the side rails, so take those off the parts tree. Looks like we're gonna have to trim those. Yeah, this part didn't quite break off as easily or as cleanly as the others have, so take your time because that tab was actually pretty thick when installed to the parts tree. So take your time, be careful when trimming it so you don't cut yourself. But still pretty easy to trim. Just a little larger tab than what I've seen so far. So now we have to use M3 by 8mm screws. They're the flathead screws. Looks like there's 5 8mm long screws and 4 10mm long screws. So the 5 are in the back and the 10 are in the 10mm long screws, the 4 of them, those are the 4 front ones. So let me show you that. This is going to install like that. And like that. So the M3 by 10mm screws are going to attach in these 2 holes, and then it looks like the M3 by 8mm are going to attach back here. One side has 2, the other side has 3. It looks like the right side rail has the 3. So let's start with the right side and then we can move on to the left side. Okay, so since it's going into plastic, we're not going to use any Loctite. And I'm not going to screw them down all the way, I'm just going to get them started. And it looks like the right side has those 3, and it looks like they're going to go here, here, and here. That hole was slightly off, so that's why I didn't tighten everything down. So there's a bit of room to play with, and that way when I do tighten it down, all the screws are already installed or started. You're going to plastic, so you don't need to tighten it too much. As soon as you feel it snug up, that's good. Okay, move on to the left rail. Again, you got the 2 M3 by 10mm that are going to go in the front. And then you're going to have the 8mm screws for these 2 holes here. And then go back and tighten them by hand. And ensure that you don't tighten too much, just strip out the plastic. Alright, so that was bag 2 step 3. We can move on to setting up the servo, which is bag 2 step 4. Alright, so we're going to set up the servo. I already got it basically turned on the ESC and got the servo centered. Took it off. I wish that it came with an aluminum servo horn, but all the ones I have won't fit, and I'll just find one locally at the hobby shop. It says to use a servo horn ring. I've never used one of those, and the only thing that looks remotely like it is this aluminum piece here. So we're going to use that. And basically they want it to be 90 degrees. So that's about okay. And then I'll put a little dab of Loctite on there so it doesn't back out. And you don't want to tighten it too much because you don't want to strip out the threads. But I basically like to just snug it up just a tad, and that should be good. Next, we're going to do the steering link. And basically, it's a set screw and 2 of these steering links. So 2 of those, I already put it in one end, a washer, and then you put this piece on, and then you just snug it down. It's not gonna line up. So basically snug, and you can see that like the holes aren't in the same direction. They're gonna be offset a little bit, and that's what the image shows as well. So now we're gonna install the 8mm long ball stud onto the servo horn. That's this piece right here. That servo horn material is pretty hard. It doesn't want to go in. All right, there you go. You just got to apply a little bit of pressure and it'll get started. And you don't want to tighten it too much. Just shoulder out onto the servo horn. And that's it. And that's step 4, bag 2. Now we got to get the servo mounting together. It looks like it's going to be these 2 aluminum pieces. We're going to use this piece right here, the servo mount brace. And then we're going to use 2 M3x6mm screws. Here's the other one. And we're going to use some Loctite on here because it's going to be going into the aluminum. So it looks like the orientation to install. Okay, so you see, trying to get this in the image. You have a little dimple on this piece. That dimple's actually gonna go in to the servo brace that way. Okay, so again, the dimples are on the front side, so it's gonna go like that. Again, we're gonna put some Loctite on there. It's going into metal. We don't want it to back out. You don't want to go too tight on here because you could crack the plastic. Just snug it down. It should be fine. And since it's going into metal and you're using Loctite, it won't back out. And then wipe off any excess. And there's that piece there. So now we can install the servo onto this piece. So the servo is going to go on like that. And there are spacers that you can use so that way it spaces out the servo. I don't think I'll need to, but it's in there and it says that they're not required for most servos, so we'll see how that works out for us. Okay, so next we're gonna use, we're gonna have 4 washers. And then 3 by 8 millimeter screws. And since we'll be going into metal, we're gonna put some Loctite on these screws so they don't back out. And this is actually a really good design because on my 8-scale buggy, what holds the screws that hold the servo in go into plastic, and I'm sure that flexes quite a bit, so this is a nice design. I'm not going to tighten them all the way down just yet. Make sure I can get them all lined up and started, and then I'll go back and finish them up again, Loctite. Now I'm gonna tighten this one and then go like a crisscross pattern. Going into aluminum, so you don't really need to tighten it down too tight. Either you don't want to strip out the aluminum. To shoulder it up, then maybe give it just a little bit more. And should be good, and especially since you're using Loctite, shouldn't back out. Okay. And then we can install the steering linkage, which I'm not 100% sure which way it's gonna go. Looks like it's gonna lay down like this. I guess you're gonna be able to adjust it as you need it or how you need it when you put it into place. So, and it's close enough, but just pop that in, which is not as easy as it looks to do by hand. Yeah, that wasn't too bad using this shock wrench. So that's in, so that's bag 2 step 5. Now we can move on to bag 2 step 6, which is installation of this onto the chassis itself. All right, so the holes line up, you can see them on the bottom. Just kind of line it up there. And then you're gonna install 2 3 by 10 millimeter screws, the flathead screws. And you're gonna install some Loctite on there since it's going into those aluminum blocks. Don't tighten it down all the way, just get it kind of started. Then when you get the second one in, you can tighten it down. You want to make sure that you can line it up and everything. Yep. Mine doesn't seem to want to line up. I'm not going to force it because I don't want to cross thread it. So just be patient. Yeah, I can definitely see the holes aren't lining up 100%. So it's causing some trouble going in. I'm gonna back out the first screw I put in a little bit, see if I can get some more play in there to line up that second screw. Tighten both sides evenly. Excess Loctite. When the servo is installed, I want to install the linkage. Just kind of adjust it until you have it lined up. And then pop it into place like that. Now we can install the top plate. Break off the tabs, trim it. So this is showing install it with two M3 by 14 millimeter screws that go right here. So let's check. I think these are the 14 millimeters screws and their button head. All right, you're going into plastic, so you don't need to tighten it down too tight. Get that one started. All right, so that was back to step 6. Now we're going to move on to step 7. So we're going to install the M3 by 10 button head screws, which are these two, I believe. Yep, they're going to go into here. And then finish tightening by hand. Make sure you don't over tighten because you're going into plastic. And there's that. Next, it says to install, well, get ready to install the front control arms because it doesn't show installing the pins yet. And this piece, there's a sharp edge and a smooth edge. And it says that the sharp edge mounts towards the bulkhead. So make sure you do that. It'll install like that. This is one of the spots where one of the local guys had mentioned where he didn't quite feel comfortable with the way this installed. So we're gonna take a look and see on the control arm how this works. It's basically you have a set screw or a button head cap screw that goes in. It's a small M2 by 4 millimeter screw that goes in and that holds the pin from backing out. So it doesn't look like there's much engagement. Remember, you're going into plastics, so you don't need to cinch it down too hard. But I tried pushing out the pin and it doesn't want to come out. So I think there's enough engagement there. Do I have a washer? I don't know if I have a washer big enough or small enough. I do. I'm actually going to put a washer there. And that might be, you know, if you take a good hit, you don't want that to come out because that could ruin your race. So I'm going to install a washer there for good measure. And it looks like there's enough thread to hold that washer in, so shouldn't be too big of a problem. And this is not a washer that came in the kit. I just have one lying around in my RC bag, so I'm just gonna install it. That way you can see that there's definitely enough engagement over that pin to prevent it from backing out. So we'll go with that. Let's do the other side. It shouldn't interfere with anything, but we'll make sure when we move on that it doesn't interfere with anything and that it provides smooth movement. And then don't fret about the anti-roll bar link not being in bag 2. It says it's not in bag 2, it's actually in bag 9 with shocks. And shock, that bag is actually this big bag here. It's not very well labeled as the other bags, so we're gonna have to comb through here and find those anti-roll bar links. So let's open that up. Looks like it's going to be in this bag here. I believe it's these pieces in this bag. So you're gonna have a bag with some springs, and I believe what we're looking for are these two pieces here. Let's get that off. The parts tree, trim it, and then install. Be careful when you're trimming this. The part is kind of small and hard to grab onto, so take extra care so you don't cut yourself. And additionally, you can use a file or some sandpaper if you're kind of worried about that. You're gonna have these blue anodized pieces that are gonna pop in here. The sway bar is gonna go in, and you're gonna put a set screw to hold that into place. So let's find the set screws. All right, these two, and I believe these are the two set screws that we need. Yeah. And remember, you're going into aluminum. You want to add a little bit of Loctite. I'm trying to think what I think the best way to assemble these is actually put them in the anti-roll bar links first, so that they don't, so it's easier to pop them in instead of them being actually attached to the car, attached to the control arms. And you're gonna notice that there's a big side and big opening and a small opening. So you're gonna put it in the big opening, so that way it goes in. And they're kind of easy to pop in, so that's not too bad. Do the other side. I'm gonna go ahead and install them on the control arm next. There's not a lot of room to get leverage in there. That's not too bad to pop in by hand. Actually, you can do it with holding it on one side. Okay. So now we can install, kind of put these into place. You can't, it's not telling us to install. Well, we're gonna kind of move on to step 8 at the same time. I'm gonna install the hinge pins. That way this will actually be held in place. But you want to install, as you're installing it, you want to put the sway bar into the sway bar link, and then make sure you put this brace in sharp side towards the bulkhead. We'll get the arms in first, then we'll worry about the sway bar links. Doesn't look like those washers are gonna affect anything, so that'll be good to leave like that. All right, so we'll install the sway bar into the links. Basically, you want to make sure that the end of the sway bar is flush with the outside of the link. And that's that. It's going to make it easier to just put a dab of thread lock on the table or onto the plate. You don't want to tighten it down too tight, so you bend the sway bar. Just kind of snug it up, feel it, make sure it's good. And since you're going to Loctite it anyway, it's going to hold that screw in, so you don't need to worry about it backing out. All right, let's do the other side. All right, happy with that. All right, sway bar action. All right, so now we can finish up step 8. You gotta install set screws at the bottom of the bulkhead, and the kit that I got came with 4, and I believe you only need 2 if you're using the plastic one. So I'm gonna go ahead and install all 4. They're really tiny. Since they're going into metal, I'm gonna be using blue Loctite. And since they're really tiny screws, don't torque too much on it. So you might round off the head and it's gonna make it impossible to get out. It looks like the front ones are up a little higher than the rear ones, and I think that might be to the fact that there's an angle to it. There's that. Now we can install the front bumper, which is this piece here. And it basically goes on like that, and you install it with 2 M3 by 16 millimeter screws that are the flathead. And they are going to thread into plastic, so you don't need to put any thread locker on it, and be careful not to strip it out. Remember, you're going into plastic, so don't torque on it too much. Just kind of feel it. As soon as it starts getting a little harder, stop, you're set. And that's the end of step 8. Now we can install the front shock tower. And remember, in bag 1 it said not to install those ball studs, so it'll make this job a lot easier. And then once we install this, we can install the ball studs. Front shock tower. Looks like we're gonna need this piece off this tree. And this is gonna install with the shock tower guard, which is this piece here. So let's trim those. And then we have this front wing mount. I'm gonna try it out and see how it works for me. It says it's optional, but comes with the kit. Might as well put it on, try it, see how the car handles with the front wing. We've got those parts ready. So we're gonna install these let's install these shock bushings first. We're gonna put it on the outermost hole. It looks like where it's countersunk, that's the front, and where it says gull wing, that's gonna be the back. It's saying to set it up with the shocks all the way on the outside. So we're gonna do that. It's a N3 by 20 millimeter screw that's gonna install. So we're gonna add some Loctite to it since it's going into aluminum. All right, so I'm gonna tighten that down just a hair. I don't wanna put too much pressure on the carbon fiber to crack it. So just be careful when you tighten it, just a little bit of pressure, not too much. Now we can install the shock tower guard, and the way that installs, looks like that goes on the front, covers the screws. Then on the back, this piece goes in here. Kind of goes in the holes, it's flush. And then you can install two M2.5 by 6 millimeter screws. I believe these are the ones. Install. Again, you're going into plastic, so you don't need to torque it down too hard. Just as soon as you feel that's tight, it's probably good. It doesn't actually show it installing the front tower. So I'm gonna look through the manual real quick and see if it shows that in another step. It does not show that in another step. It shows it installed. It's unclear, but it looks like there's two N3 by 10 millimeter screws that attach to the bottom here and go to the bottom screws here, it looks like. Oh, let's find two M3 by 10, which I believe are those. And then the M3 by 14 is what is used for the wing mount. Okay, so the bottom holes, I didn't tighten it down all the way, just enough to get it started. And once I have the other side in, I'll tighten it down by hand. And this wing mount attaches like so. And then you have the longer screws, they're the M14s, and you're just gonna install those. All right, before we finish off bag 2, we need to install these ball studs that we skipped in bag 1 to make the installation of this tower much easier. They go on the inside hole. Man, that's a tight fit. You're going into plastic, so you don't need to tighten it too much. Just snug it up. The other side. All right, and that's it. Thanks for watching this video. Stay tuned for the next one where I will go into bag 3 and bag 4. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and please leave some comments if you have any questions, concerns, or any tips for this part or anything like that that might help other people. Thanks. Bye.